Terrific. Okay, so just very briefly, before I begin, just a small item that I should mention. Unlike the United States, and I'm not sure what the position is in India or Korea, but unlike the United States, lecturers are not automatically professors. We have to be raised to the professoriate, a bit like being appointed to the House of Lords. And so my title is Doctor, not Professor. I thought I'd just make that correction. Right, so Sojong, may I kick off?
Yes, please. And sorry for the mistake.
No, not at all. It's a common mistake, but I don't want to make any claims that are inaccurate. So the title of my address is, if you can't measure it, how do you know it's real? Under the rubric of In Search of Global Best Practices. And the proposition that I'd like to put to you is that the efficacy of rules for consumer financial well-being, unless they're measured, how do you know that they are effective, and how do you know that consumer financial well-being is improving? And the reason why I think that's important is because I think that financial well-being should be the goal, not the protection of the financial industry. As the chair of Australia's version of the SEC, what in Australia is known as ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, stated not long ago, the financial industry must serve the community, not the other way around. And the work that I've been doing in this space is focused very much on consumer financial well-being in South Africa. South Africa is currently rolling out the Twin Peaks model of financial regulation. And there you can see the two peaks. This is a model that was first implemented in Australia. Wasn't devised by an Australian, it was devised by an Englishman by the name of Michael Taylor, and he proposed it originally for adoption in the United Kingdom, but it was first adopted in Australia, and then much later in the United Kingdom, and now recently South Africa is rolling out Twin Peaks adoption. And the Twin Peaks model involves two peak regulators. One regulator deals with all financial service providers in terms of their prudential health, and the other peak regulator deals with all financial service providers in terms of their market conduct and their consumer protection. And I've been involved with the drafting of the aptly named Conduct of Financial Institutions Act in South Africa, which is currently in bill form. And the aim of that legislation, as the title implies, is to drive good conduct amongst financial institutions in South Africa. The bill itself is based and draws very heavily on the Treating Customers Fairly regime, TCF, which was first implemented in the United Kingdom in 2005, and then copied in South Africa in 2011. Just give me a moment. I just want to see if I can, right, no, I can't do that, okay. So the Treating Customers Fairly regime, as I say, was first implemented in the United Kingdom and then copied in South Africa. And it rests on 6 core principles. The wording of those 6 principles is almost identical from the by comparison between the United Kingdom and South Africa. And they're principles that look at, on the whole, the product life cycle, which is a more extensive cycle than the customer journey, because obviously the product life cycle begins before a customer is involved, when the product is devised and dreamt up. But there are also TCF strictures that apply or that seek to drive conduct at the level of firm culture and firm governance. So if you look at Outcome number one, customers are confident that they are dealing with firms where the fair treatment of customers is central to the firm culture, that the products and services that are marketed are designed to meet the needs of identified customer groups, and that they are targeted accordingly. And in South Africa, because South Africa is a developing country with a large number of highly vulnerable financial consumers that have been traditionally excluded from the financial system, this also includes driving financial inclusion. It requires that customers be given clear disclosure and be appropriately informed before, during, and after the time that they contract with the company. Where customers receive advice, that advice must be not only suitable, but must take account of the customer's circumstances, for example, their level of sophistication or their needs. That customers are provided with products that perform as they have been led to believe they will, and that the service associated with those products and services is acceptable, and that they don't face unreasonable post-sale barriers to change the product or switch providers or submit a claim or make a complaint. Now, I'd like to point out that in the United Kingdom, this actually had the force of legislation, whereas in South Africa, the TCF regime was aspirational and by self-assessment, but is now to be codified in the Conduct of Financial Institutions Act. So as I say, the TCF regime requires that fairness be delivered throughout the product life cycle. And as I say, this in South Africa was initially by self-assessment only, but will now, after 9 years of companies having the opportunity to self-assess and to implement TCF, they will now be held to these principles by legislation. But in order to determine whether these principles are being complied with, the Conduct Authority, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the FSCA, needs to be able to measure progress. It needs to be able to conduct thematic reviews of the industry. It needs to be able to conduct risk assessments, the risk of certain products to the public, certain services to the public. And it needs to be able to do that ex ante, not only in terms of breaches ex post. It needs to be able to see risks that have not yet eventuated, but are likely to eventuate. So in late 2019, I was approached by CGAP, the consultative group to assist the poor, which is a division of the World Bank, to help them devise a framework of indicators to measure customer outcomes in the financial industry. And as I say, this work is done with CGAP as a division of the World Bank. And I conducted this work with an Australian South African management consulting firm called DB and Associates. And what we did is we examined first the sources from where the South African Market Conduct and Consumer Protection Regulator, the FSCA, obtains its information. And that is a fairly extensive set of inputs. There are inputs from other regulators. There are inputs from on-site supervision and off-site supervision, analytics, questionnaires, an already existing conduct of business review for the insurance industry, a conduct of business review which tracks TCF implementation and compliance. There is a very detailed and very fulsome cooperation from 6 different ombud schemes: an ombud for long-term insurance, short-term insurance, banking, financial intermediaries, credit as a subset of banking, a specialized credit ombud, and a pensions industry ombud. Input from civil society groups, from other government departments. They're able to look at media and social media. There are sentiment indexes that are indices that are compiled in South Africa. There are reports from time to time from the Competition Commission and from trade associations. And all of this is able to be measured against what you see in the bottom right-hand corner, which is the core goal of the FSCA as elucidated in the regulations and in banking and in standards that they're able to issue. South Africa, like Australia, has a regulator that is empowered to issue what are called standards, and those standards have force of law. So we looked in great detail at all the different kinds of information that the Conduct Authority is able to garner. And then in another part of the consultancy, there was very detailed consultations over an extensive period of time with 5 financial service providers: Capitec Bank, which is one of the big 5, Nedbank, which is another one of the big 5, Metropolitan Life, which is both a short and long-term insurer, Old Mutual, which is also a short and long-term insurer, and KGA Life, which is a life insurer. And despite the fact that South Africa is a developing country, it has a very sophisticated financial industry. It has very much a developed country financial industry. And so these companies were in the habit of collecting quite substantial amounts of information about how they were tracking against TCF already. And what that enabled us to do was to devise a set of 157 indicators. And I'll give you an indication here of about 10, 8 on the screen. And you can see that each one of these is a type of information that can be delivered to the FSCA. So each one of these indicators is the ones that I've chosen all relate to product suitability. The first one, as you can see, looks at features and benefits and price, and it's based on customer insights and needs in varied segments. It looks at customer analysis and market research to see whether the products are being accurately segmented. In the 4th column is an indication of an attestation. So there are principally 3 kinds of indicators that we formulated: quantitative, qualitative, and attestation. So an attestation is a question to the company: do you segment your customer base into clearly defined target markets with useful insights and reporting that provide a shared understanding of the customers you serve? Yes or no? Now, you might be saying to yourself, it's very easy for a company simply to say, yes, we do that, when they don't. But that's where all the other indicators come in. So there will be a place for a company to make an attestation. Yes, we do these things. And then there are all sorts of other indicators to check whether they really do the things that they've said they do. If we look at, for example, the second one, there you see in column 6, an opportunity to collect evidence to support the attestation above, providing a list of groupings, customer segment groupings and market segment groupings. In the third one, you'll see that there is an opportunity again for an attestation. Do you use customer insights into needs and preferences and lifestyles and behaviors to ensure that products are designed and positioned appropriately? And then the one below that, you will see there's an opportunity to collect evidence to support that attestation. And as I say, there are 157 indicators that we have developed along with CGAP and the World Bank. And those will then be So not all of them will be applicable to every kind of firm. Some will be applicable to all firms, some only to insurers, some only to banks, etc. And those are then compiled in a questionnaire or a request for information in the form of a what's called a conduct of business review. And those then go out to the companies, and the conduct of business review is then returned to the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, and they then analyze the data that they've obtained. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope I'd like to think I'm exactly on time at 15 minutes.